It is not hard to create jobs by getting poorer. I want to repeat that. It is no great feat to create a lot of jobs if you're willing to get much poorer. If we got rid of the minimum wage, got rid of unemployment insurance, if we simply forced Americans to get jobs at, say, $2 a day, we could create a lot of jobs. $2 a day is about what the typical Chinese worker is now earning. Great. But it's not great at all. What have we actually created? Well, we created a lot of lousy jobs. We're on the way already to create a lot of lousy jobs. The fastest growing sectors of the American economy have been retail, restaurant, hotel, hospital, surface transportation, construction, child care, elder care, hospital orderlies. These are lousy jobs. The dollar drops relative to foreign currencies. Yes, great. Well, that means our standard of living continues to drop because everything we buy from abroad costs more. Again, bear with me. It is not hard to create a lot of jobs by getting poorer. The goal is not just jobs. The goal is good jobs. The long-term problem we face is not the problem of joblessness. The long-term problem we face is low wages and declining wages for a significant part of the United States population. I sometimes get into debates with people where they say, well, you know, the thing is, it's all about American companies. If we just strengthen U.S. companies, if we just give them more tax breaks, if we just give them more benefits, U.S. companies will generate more jobs. That is also a fallacy. And the fallacy is that it's hard to even find a big U.S. company today that is not also a global company. And they are creating jobs all over the world. I remember, this is not new. When I was Secretary of Labor, I needed to buy a new car, and I looked at, around at the car showrooms, and I picked out a Toyota that looked very good, and of course, I got back to the office, did not buy it yet, and my assistant, who is very politically astute, said, Mr. Secretary, I'm terribly sorry to remind you of this, and it's probably obvious, and you're going to be embarrassed when I say it, but you're Secretary of Labor of the United States. And of course, I immediately saw the wisdom of this young man's ways, and the next weekend I went and found a Ford that looked great, and it was almost as good as the Toyota. But then I had the wisdom and foresight to ask the dealer, the auto dealer, I said, now you've got to tell me honestly, was this car, I mean, it looks good, but I know it has a Ford nameplate, but was this car actually made in the United States by American workers? And he looked at me for a long time, trying to decide, was I one of those, or was I one of those? And finally, he looked up with a smile and said, which would you prefer? But you see my point. I mean, everything is everything. I mean, inside a car, parts are coming from all over the world. The iPod is designed in California, and it is put together in China from parts that are coming from Vietnam and a little bit from Japan. Everything is becoming globalized. The standard of living of Americans in the future depend not on U.S. companies' profitability. The standard of living of Americans in the future depends on the value we add to an increasingly integrated global economy. The value we add to an increasingly integrated global economy. Does this mean that we've all have got to attract global investment and be poor? No. Does it mean that we have to compete with South Vietnam or Bangladesh or even China in terms of jobs? Not directly. A few years ago, I had to have my two hips, both of them replaced. And I was talking about globalization, and I was talking about American jobs and also the value added of American workers, and I realized that I had not made a very important personal, existential inquiry, and that was where my new hips came from. They're great, beautiful hips. I wish I could show them to you. I can't. And it turned out, and I did go back to the hospital, and I made some inquiries. It turned out that my beautiful new hips, they were not made in China or in South Vietnam or in Bangladesh. My beautiful new hips were actually fabricated in Germany. And they were designed in France. I have French designer hips. But the point I want to make with you is that why were they fabricated in Germany? They were fabricated in Germany because German workers were able to generate such highly precise, perfect, highly engineered products that even though German wages are very high, in fact, the typical German worker today on a purchasing parity basis is actually earning more than a typical American worker. Nonetheless, the world is willing to pay for German engineering because Germans do it that well. All of this should point to an obvious conclusion for you. And the conclusion is that with regard to the U.S. economy, all we have, folks, all we have, we don't have capital. Capital is now global. Brand names are now global. Access to factories and equipment, now global. All we have that is unique, uniquely American, on which our future standard of living uniquely depends, is our people. Their ingenuity, their capacity to solve and identify problems, their insights, their education, and the infrastructure that links people together. And if we don't invest in education and infrastructure, and I'm talking broadly about education. I mean, everything from early childhood education all the way through higher public education. If we don't make those investments, then we might as well quit, because we are going to see, number one, this Great Recession is never going to be over, because people are never going to have enough money in their pockets to be able to turn around and buy the things that U.S. workers can produce. But number two, we are going to see an increasing portion of our population become absolutely poor. And that is what is already happening. The median wage today for people who have jobs is 5% below what it was in 2001. We are on the way to becoming a poor nation, and it's not everybody who's going poor. In fact, people at the top are doing quite well, if you hadn't noticed. Inequality is widening. In the late 1970s, the top 1% of Americans by income took home about 9% of total national income. And then income concentrated more and more and more and more until by 2007, on the cusp of the Great Recession, the top 1% took home 23.5% of total national income. Now, I am not blaming them. This is not class warrior stuff at all. I'm simply saying to you that if you look at the top 1%, what do you see? You people are not only extremely well educated and well connected, or very lucky. They had the best education you can imagine, most of them. Many of them, unfortunately, went to Ivy League schools and then on to getting Harvard MBAs and then went to Wall Street. That is probably the worst drain on our talent in this country or any country anybody could ever invent. I would much rather them actually go into the production of things or ideas or solutions to real problems rather than go to Wall Street, but that's another story.